I guess we'll get underway. Thanks, everyone. I'm Jim Rogers from the Center for Irish Studies here at St. Thomas, and it's my honor to introduce Kerry Hardie this evening. But let me get some of my literature here. Waving our literature here in front of me. It's a delight to have you all here on this beautiful spring evening. So come on in, come in. It's only me. I want to make a special thank you to the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library with whom we co-sponsored this event and who've been tremendous and as an organization certainly worthy of our support and our attention and have become really important players in the literary scene on this side of the water and of the water being the Mississippi River and beyond. And thanks to the University of St. Thomas for its support of the Center for Irish Studies, which is now in its 10th year. We'll be approaching its 10th year. I'll say a little bit more about it. Thanks to Mr. O'Shaughnessy, who is here with us tonight, who generously funds this award and who has presented the award last night to Kerry Hardie. And a special welcome to those of you who are students. I know you were all here, some perhaps with a little coercion. I'm sure you're tired from getting up at 3 o'clock this morning to watch the Pope's funeral. But it was nice of you to come out on this evening. The Center for Irish Studies has been here at St. Thomas since 1996. Our purposes are to advance scholarship in Irish studies through teaching and research and publication. I would exhort you all to look seriously at New Hibernia Review. It's a quarterly journal of Irish studies that we publish here. I happen to have brought a couple hundred subscription forms, so please do. And I have more. And in fact, it's a bargain. You subscribe because these are $5 cheaper. We raised the price, so you should subscribe tonight. So this is a copy of New Hibernia as well. We also, I think, work to increase internationalism here at St. Thomas by sounding the Irish note, and in some way we honor the many links between this institution and Ireland and the Irish American community. You don't have to. The very ground on which this school stands was donated by an Irish immigrant, and there's the building names and everything, and of course, much more important than that is the living tradition of Irish studies that we have some part in. The O'Shaughnessy Award is unique in North America. There is no other award that honors Irish poets, Irish writers in North America. It has gone to what we're very proud of the list. I can tick them off: Evan Boland, John F. Dean, Peter Sir, Louis Dupuer, an Irish language poet, Moya Cannon, Frank Ormsby, Tom McCarthy, Michael Cody, and now Kerry Hardie is our 9th honoree. It's adjudicated by what in the literary award business is called internal nomination, which is a group of chosen nominators. We ask their opinion for who is deserving of an award, and Kerry's name kept coming up and up and up, and we're honored to have her here. We don't tell her who it is. So, but it's carries a great deal of prestige here and abroad, and it carries a generous financial support that I'm sure Irish poets put to good use. I'm not. They don't all stock their wine cellar with it. They find other things. So some might. Kerry Hardie comes to us from County Kilkenny. She was born in Singapore, worked as a journalist in Northern Ireland in the 1970s, has lived in Scotland, educated in England, but has lived in Kilkenny for the last 25 years or so. In addition to her poetry, her 3 volumes of poetry, which are going to be for sale over here, and we have some students from the Literary Club who will be helping you afterwards. In addition to her poetry, Kerry is a novelist. A Winter Marriage came out from Little Brown a couple years ago, and there's another novel coming out sometime in the future, but we're not quite sure when. She's negotiating with her publishers.
I'm fighting with my publishers.
Fighting with her publishers. Last night we presented the award to Kerry Hardie, and the citation that accompanied it, written by our good friend Dr. Tom Redshaw here, had this to say about the award. Each award has confirmed our own and Ireland's fidelity to the craft and wisdom of letters. In this new century, everywhere the arts are challenged by commerce, by politics, and by diversion. Yet by affirming the art of poetry and the accomplishment of the poet, each O'Shaughnessy Award recognizes the painful realities of sudden economic and social transformation in Ireland and elsewhere, that they may be addressed with assurance and grace. And I think about those words, painful realities, assurance, and grace. Those of you who have been in writing workshops, you know how sometimes they tell you in a failed draft, well, just circle the words that stand out. Just circle the ones that stand out. And when I think of Kerry Hardie, I think of those words. I think of assurance and grace, and I think of pain. I think of the painful realities that she writes about. But maybe that's what her poems do. They circle the things that stand out for us. They circle that assurance, the times when we are ambushed by grace, when we're ambushed by insight, by affection, by the beauty around us. Please join me in welcoming Kerry Hardie.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for coming out on such a spring evening. I wouldn't have, I must say. I think you're very normal. And I'd just like to say that, to thank again Larry and Bonnie O'Shaughnessy, and to say that of all the welcomes I've received in America, the warmest has been at St. Thomas. So I will now begin, and hope I don't bore you. I'm going to start with a poem that was written. It's my protest against the modern world because I find it quite hard to handle. I live in a house in the middle of surrounded by fields on a hillside in rural Ireland. The fields are diminishing as more houses get built around, but still it is quiet, and still there are the sounds of sheep and cattle. I don't know if what I'm about to describe is a phenomenon that happens in America, but whenever I've read this poem in Ireland, people always say or women always say that's exactly how it is with us. Whenever I phoned my home, my father would sometimes answer the telephone, and he would always hand it straight to my mother. Do fathers talk to their children in America? And then, having handed it straight to my mother, he would sit in the background and tell her what to say to me. So there was this three-way conversation which was endlessly distracting. So this is called communication. My father wouldn't talk on the phone. He gave it to my mother, then told her what to say to me. He seemed to need this go-between, as though without I was too raw, the whole complicated business too risky, too much effort. My brother is the same. He phones someone, and if they're in, he hangs up, rings back later for the answer phone. I am less sure. I think I have to do these things to prise myself loose from my nature. Sometimes after a long call, I feel betrayed into words I have not thought through, accused because I do not want this miracle. I am too slow to move so fast. Alone in the house, I let the phone ring for days. I don't turn on stereo or radio or television. The membrane of the walls thins like muslin, the light presses through. Wind sounds, bird sounds, field sounds of cattle and sheep penetrate. The swish of the crows flowing over. I live deep in the world, and I grow like my father. Thank you. The next poem comes from my first collection. I'm just going to go through them in order. A Furious Place. Don't worry, I'm not going to read them all in order. And it's called The Young Woman Stands on the Edge of Her Life. I wrote this poem when my stepson was about to go off to university, and his mother repeatedly dreamed that it was herself who was going off and not her son. And in a way, this was symbolic of how quickly life passes and how We have the illusion of choice, but it's gone before, it's over before we've made the decision. And it's about how quickly life passes. There are some images you may need me to talk about a little. I mentioned a cleft stick. I'm sure water diviners are not alien to you. Yes, you know what a water diviner is. So the cleft stick jumping in the hand means that water is near. There's a hazel tree mentioned here. In Ireland, there are two trees that were always planted beside holy wells. One was the hazel, which was the female tree, and the other was the ash, which was the male tree. I always find this a bit strange because the ash is such a graceful tree. I'm not implying that men aren't graceful. But I learned that it was because it was used to make hurleys, which is our national game, and particularly Kilkenny's national game. And whenever we have a dog that dies, or when my husband shoots a rabbit or something like that, if we don't eat the dogs, but if we don't eat the rabbits, we've got into the habit, it's a family habit that's gone back for years in my family. We plant a tree over where the dog is, so that that tree becomes Bruce's tree, and that tree becomes Darky's tree, etc., etc. And it's sort of, for me, it has the symbolism of, it's a fertilizer. The dead animal is a fertilizer for the tree, so it's the symbolism of the continuance of life. So this is called it's written in two parts, and it's called "The Young Woman Stands on the Edge of Her Life." The young woman stands on the edge of her life, saying the words, mother, daughter, sister, a trinity more dense than father, brother, son. Mother, the deep mud in the yard. Daughter, a bowl, a love word, a receptacle. Sister stands beside me, her sword drawn. Where will I live? Down here in the earth with the women, or up on the hill where the dogs bay and the men feed watchfires? The cleft stick jumps in my hand, the path seeks its own way. Where they buried the rabbit, they planted the hazel tree. The earth dragged at the new roots, which parted the crumbling flesh as sweetly as touch parts silk, soaked years in the sun. It was all decided and accomplished before she remembered she had forgotten to make her choice. The next poem, I had the pleasure of being taken out on a canoe this afternoon, and by a man who knows the west of Ireland very well, and parts that we also go to a lot. And so it made me remember the sights and sounds of the west of Ireland. And when I was a child, my mother used to play with me this game of listening, where you shut your eyes and you try and listen to sounds. Does anybody play that game as a child? No, it's not common here? Yes, some people are nodding. Well, it's like you close your eyes, and first of all you get the near sounds, and then it moves out and out and out, and you get the sounds from more and more distance. And it's like a way of learning a landscape. And it gives a sense of place and a sense of peace. And this poem was written, I took the notes for it and then wrote it later in the evening, on one of those rare, quiet, sunny afternoons in the west of Ireland, when there's hardly any wind and you can hear everything. And one of the things that I like most about the Dingle Peninsula is the way that the fields run right down almost to the sea itself. So you get cattle coming down to cool themselves on the edge on a very rare hot day. It's called 5 o'clock Strand. And you have to imagine you playing the game. You sit in the grass, eyes closed, hands wrapped around your knees, playing the game of what do I hear, hearing the sunny stillness, the plate moved on the drainer in the house behind, the two girls on the stones above the sands, their fidget of shifting stones, their quiet talk, their laughter, the dog inland, his few barks, the bee strayed from the clover, the 5 o'clock news, its first unguarded sentence, the lazy sound of the sea, not even trying, the fizz of the drying rack, the wash of the silence. You open your eyes, the fineness, the stillness, the glitter, the man who walks the child up the grassy road, the seagrass, the tide far out, the absence of treachery, the starlings fanning out across the sands. It reminds and reminds of life's space sweetness, of summers past, of summers not yet lived. All our small lives, how they are given to us, how we accept them. Soft bellow of the cow behind the strand, a time of day for milking and for tea. Now I'm going to go to, is it here? Yes. I'm going to go to my second book, which is called Cry for the Hot Belly, and it's a poem called The Cruelest Month, and it was written, it's set in Kilkenny. It was a spring evening like this, only our light is very different from yours and it doesn't get as warm as quickly. And we were driving through a little town not far from where we live called Thomastown, and it's on the River Nore, and it used to be a wool town. It was because the monks in that area all were sheepmen, and the fleeces would go down the river to Waterford, where they would be taken off to the continent. Italian buyers in the 12th century lived in Waterford City, which seems strange to us now, but that's the way it was. And we were driving through this town, and I saw a friend of mine whose name is Bernadette Kiley. She's a painter, and she ended up doing the cover of my third book. And she didn't see us, and she was walking with her husband, and she was dressed in a long dark coat, and she was carrying this huge bunch of lilacs in her hand. And she reminded me, she looked like a figure from another century. There was something about the way they walked that reminded me of a couple coming home from one of those plain weddings, which were often based on economics, not on love, coming home to begin the life contracted. And she didn't see us, and we didn't stop, but this image haunted me, and because there are stone quays that she was walking along, I began to imagine the other lives that had come before her life, that had come in the same way, and those lives that seemed to have bled into our lives. So this is about that continuity from one century to the next. Now, what do you need to know? The title comes from the T.S. Eliot poem, April is the Cruelest Month, Breeding Lilacs Out of a Dead Land. We have a tradition of planting white lilac beside the Marian shrines on the roadside, but very often on the ruined gable ends where people which is all that's left of the caverns that people emigrated from, you will be able to find them by the purple lilacs which people planted for pleasure. It's the cruelest month. We came round the bent road in the drowned light of a spring evening, and I saw you in your dark coat, your hair dark, your face white, your hands full of lilacs. You might have been a bride, the way you walked, your head high, him beside you, but separate. like a woman coming from a church 100 years ago, going home with the man to begin the life contracted. It was all lit from elsewhere, the stormy evening, the white light, the small squat houses, the river running black by the stone quays, the chestnuts climbing. And those lilacs, a mass of them spreading out of your hands, a white one, a mauve one, a white one, not casual, some eye deciding, some hand arranging, the eyes bidding. All week I'd been on about lilacs, had stood by the window in the evening, looking down on a lilac in the garden, its few blooms, with the reddish stain of blood behind their purple. Those famous lines were in my mind, this being the month, but it wasn't right. His lilacs, not our lilacs. Our lilacs out of a green land, some with blood on their roots, and white ones planted by the Marian grottos, and mauve, plebeian, by the ruined great gable ends. These lilacs drawn to your hands like the thought forms of flowers, their fall over your hands down the dark coat, their thick scent on the chilly air. You, by the quay, walking another century, as though our dramas act and reenact on the same stage, so that I saw you, and a woman that had gone before you, and lilacs clustering into your hands from hers. The next poem it's called Carthage. I don't know, oh, this is Catholic University, your Latin will be excellent, I'm sure. The title comes from Carthage being the eternal city, or supposedly the eternal city of the ancient world, and then Carthago delenda est, it was completely destroyed. And it's about, again, it's about life and death. My husband is a very noisy sleeper. And anyone who sleeps, I can be noisy too, but especially when I have sinusitis, but I don't usually mention that. Anyone who sleeps beside a noisy sleeper knows that moment when you wake up and it's suddenly quiet. And you put out your hand just to check. And then, so this is Carthage. Lying beside you, my hand on your sleeping, feeling your life, a pulse of light round the skin. Lying beside you, your strong bones, dense flesh, this life thing, no more than the weight of a blink of the dark moth's eye. Now, there's always somewhere in a reading that I lose the poem that I was going to read, and I thought this was the moment, but I found it. This one is, I want to read this for Larry and Bonnie because of a conversation we had in their house when they kindly invited me over. It's called Countryman. The little town nearest where I live is called Graignamanagh, which means the town of the monks. It's there's an 800-year-old abbey in Graignamanagh, which is the only abbey that has had continuous celebration of Mass through all of those 800 years. Because of the penal laws, a lot of places didn't. But because it was protected by the local landlord, even in penal times when its roof had fallen in, there was a chapel that was roofed with straw and Mass was still celebrated there. So the 800th anniversary was a big deal, and everybody got very. Before I should say that the town had 20 years ago had gone to great lengths and raised a huge amount of money and had the abbey re-roofed because that had long gone, and now it is a beautiful working abbey. And as everybody got excited and as it got nearer, I began to imagine, or I began to feel, I think when something important happens, spirit forms draw close in a place. And so I began to imagine these monks coming back to see what was going on out of a kind of curiosity, because I think when you've been that long out of your body, it's probably you have other business in other places. But because they were essentially they were Cistercians, and so which meant they were sheepmen, so they were countrymen too. And I have a neighbor, and this is an interesting synchronicity, because at the dinner last night, Larry chose to read a poem I wrote called Red Houses. And this poem is about the husband of the woman in Red Houses. And his name is Jim, and he breeds dogs. Now, my father also bred dogs. And one of his dogs, Jess, this is going to get very complicated, so listen carefully. One of his dogs, Jess, is out of one of our dogs, Ginny. And with a hunting spaniel, the custom with us is to dock the tail. In other words, you cut the tail short. It sounds cruel, but it's because a spaniel constantly lashes its tail. So they get cut and bloodied working through rough briars. So if you cut them short, it saves the dog pain in the end. But dog men like to have a white flash on the end of the tail so you can see where your dog's working. So if the tail is mostly brown and there's just white at the end, there's a very long tail and only one. So Jess had been cut with a long tail and a white flash right at the end. And in November, there's a concert once a week, a music concert in the Abbey. One of them is traditional music and the other three are classical music. And Jim and Francis like to come to the traditional music one. And we were sitting there in the Abbey, and it was just before the 800th anniversary. And it was late starting, as everything is in Ireland. And so Jim was telling me he had a litter of pups out of Jess, and he was telling me about docking the tails. So I'm sorry the preamble was so long. Here's the poem. We were sitting in the Abbey waiting, and he was telling me low-voiced about their week-old spaniel pups. The one with the tail that was two-thirds brown, the white only up near the tip. If he did it right, he said, if he cut for the flash, she'd be like the mother, her tail overlong, always bloody after hunting, ribboned by furze and briar. To hell with the theory, he said, the theory and the purists. Blaze or no blaze, he'd cut her short, he'd not see her hurt like Jess. It was November. The old year was slipping, the new one drawing closer. There were monks drifting through, you could feel them, uncertain, pressed close to the walls and in the worn places, called back to mark these 800 years of the Abbey's grey stones in the valley. He would do it himself. He would, he said. A hot knife, fast, the heat sealing the cut flesh. His hands mined the knife and the pup. I watched them, the swift, sure cut against the dark wood, the monks drawing in for a better look. I thought of our pups, warm flesh sacks. They jumped in my hands as the clippers closed of the small bloody heap of puppy dogs' tails on the vet's tables. The monks were remembering the oddness of hands, smells, blood. You could feel them growing denser, focused, remembering the body's red roar, and the past stretching back till it slid off the edge of time and the world. And always a dog and a man, through first light, through last light, a man and a dog moving always together. you. I'll tell Jim you clapped. He'll be pleased. I'm going to read one from, it's another monk one. It's another monkey sort of one, and I believe that some of you did it in class today, so it'll be appropriate. I had decided before I knew that. I have a friend who works for the Agricultural Board, the Agricultural Advisory Board called Choggas, and one night, and his name's Michael Casey, and for some reason, Michael doesn't usually tell me his dreams, but he told me he had this dream, and in his dream, there was this St. Ultan had appeared, and St. Ultan, for some reason, had baptized St. Patrick. And I said to Michael, Michael, who was St. Ultan? And he says, I haven't a clue. So I went home and I looked up St. Ultan. I don't think he's recognized by Rome. We have a lot of local saints that are not. And I found that St. Ultan was one of 3 saints, all brothers. How's that for going? They were the saints Ultan, Fursey, Ultan, and Foylan. And they were born in Ireland and went to England sometime around 630 to convert the English. And they founded a monastery at Burgh Castle near Yarmouth. Well, Fursey went off to France. A lot of the Irish monks did go off to France, and they founded monasteries which are still there to this day. And, but the Mercians, who were a Germanic tribe, descended on the monastery in England and burned it to the ground. This was a hazard if you were a monk. So off they went, the other brothers, after Fursey, and Foylan had great success converting the Brabantes, who were another tribe. This is a long time ago. He was murdered by forest outlaws in 655, but Fursey and Ultan managed to die in their beds, and they died in 648 and 686, respectively. And I don't know where this poem came from. It was one of those poems that just appeared. And I showed it to a brother of mine, and he said it was more like a drinking song than a saintly song. And I think that came because I was imagining a time when religion was, when Christianity was comparatively new and exciting and wasn't so hemmed in and tired as we have made it through these centuries. St. Fursey's song. St. Fursey speaks to his brothers, Ultan and Foylan. Come, brothers, we are free now. Let us live freely, the rose and the fire in our hearts. Let us not worry our heads over rightness or wrongness, nor fret about goodness, but sing like the birds in the trees. And we will go wandering, following the light. We will sleep where we will, and sleep where we will, and take no more care than the lilies in his book. I made inquiries of that olive-skinned young man, he who studies under Cummian and comes from a place called Lebanon. He tells me these lilies spring up like our orchids, fair and careless and singing with color, and we 3 will be like them, and will walk with easy steps even in the darkest, most fearsome of places. And certainly we will fear, but underneath our fear we will be fearless. So let us take up our ash plants and be off. And you, Ultan, bring that pup if you cannot leave her. She will lift up your heart when your feet are sore. She may even bring us a bird for the pot, but I doubt it. I think she is not of the stuff of great hunters. And you, Foylan, tell your crow to follow after, and sometimes to go before us to show us the way. For he is a ruffianly bird, full of appetite and hard sense, and it's well that men like us be watched for by such as him. Now farewell, Ireland, loveliest of all earth's lands. We may never more see you with human eyes, but know that we will always have sight of you in our hearts. And farewell to all who dwell in this land. Do not fear for us, for our souls are safe. And what are our bodies but little sod houses, putting shelter round fire and round love? What harm then if the house should crumble? Fire and love cannot crumble. Fire and love will burn always in one house or another, lighting windows in the darkest night. Thank you. The next one is another, I suppose there's another saint involved in this, only he's not a Christian saint, he's a Muslim saint, he's a Sufi saint. Only I haven't written the page down, which means I have done the usual and not found failed to find one poem. It's called On Derry's Walls. Now, again, it'll take some explaining. It begins, I'm a bit shy because I can see that there are two women up who are in Islamic dress, and I don't know how to pronounce Sunan ibn Hamza al-Muhib. Can you help me? That's not bad? Okay. Well, he was known as the lover of Baghdad, which is sort of interesting in the present time. He died sometime after 900, and these old Sufis have meant a lot to me because they wrote the most extraordinary things. He wrote this, and this is what the poem begins with. A thing can be explained only by that which is more subtle than itself. There is nothing subtler than love. By what then can love be explained? Now, I lived in Derry near the start of the Troubles, just after Bloody Sunday and Motorman, and a time of considerable violence. And I went back 2 years ago because I got a residency there to work on the novel that is presently being edited. And I was quite shocked at the extent of I was shocked, first of all, by how the hatred had deepened. I was shocked by the way that the communities had ceased to live together, that one half had moved to one side of the river and the other half to the other side of the river. I had a flat which was in an old Bluecoat school, the heart of Derry is surrounded by walls, and the heart of Derry, on the walls dwells the Protestant establishment. You have the last British fort still in Derry, the law courts, the Protestant cathedral. So it's very much, and down below is where the Catholic Bogside is, and then the estates of the Creggans stretch up. So it was very much the heart of the old Protestant establishment, and for all the years I'd lived in Derry before, you couldn't walk the walls because that's where the army were. It was all gated and it was closed, and it was armed. And for the first time since I'd known the city, you could walk the walls. The gates were still there, but they were mostly open. When there was trouble, they were closed again, but you could walk the walls. At the same time, down below in the Guildhall, the Bloody Sunday Tribunal was going on, which was a tribunal to establish who had actually given the orders to fire on a civilian march, and in which 13 civilians were killed. And I used to go and watch these proceedings. There was a public gallery. And I watched, because of the time lapse, 30 years, people had told these stories many times, and witness changes. We think we see things that we don't necessarily see. And I watched a lot of very sincere people being humiliated by clever lawyers who would prove conclusively, they would say, well, you were here, and they would get the witness to agree, and then they would say, and you saw this soldier have this evil look on his face this look of hate as he fired on you, and the witness would agree. And then they would put up a chart proving that there was no way that the witness could possibly have seen the expression on the soldier's face because it was the length of a football field away. So it was a strange exercise, and I'm not sure who it benefits. So I wrote this poem taking this wonderful Sufi quote because the only way that I could think of to handle what I was seeing and experiencing was to try and put love back in it. Now, on my perambulations around the walls at dusk, it was in the depth of winter, there was a blackbird, which was always just over the Protestant cemetery where the Protestant dead were buried who had been the defenders in the siege of Derry. So it's very symbolic. It's all about the divided community. So, on Derry's walls, the blackbird that lives in the graveyard sits on the wall at the fade of the winter day. He has fed off the worms that fed off the clay of the Protestant dead. And yet he is subtle, subtle and bright, as the love that might explain him, yet may not be explained. As for the rest, there is almost nothing to add, not even this is how it was, because all we can ever say is this is how it looked to me. In the blackbird's looped entrails, everything is resolved. You're extremely patient with my Irish history lessons. I'll read two more. One of them is going to be on a bit of paper. I've been sick for a long time, and when I was a young woman, I thought that you either died when you got sick or you got better. And I had no idea how many people lived hidden lives of endurance. And since I started to read publicly, so many people come up to me afterwards and they say that they like to see this recognized. So this was written very recently. I was reading an 8th century Chinese poet called Tu Fu, who writes as if it was today. And it's called In Bed Again, and it's after reading Tu Fu. 5:30, February dusk, the few last tits and finches, black in the netted branches of the silver birch, flitter and loop the hanging feeders. The wheelbarrow lies on its side in the long wet grass, its yellow handles rusting into gloom. How tired I am, but quiet too. Better this than the exhausted rage that sickness lays upon my doorstep as a cat its kill. How still the garden, still the rowan and ash. The first lambs stagger the muddy field. Life passes slowly, slowly, and all the while the furious horses gallop over the endless reaches of the yellow plain. And I'll finish with another poem about sickness. It's a poem about a death. There's few things I've learned from as deeply as death and sickness. Often I wish I didn't have to do it this way, but I think everybody who experiences it, it's the same for them. Page 53. And it's called When Mora Had Died. And I've written down the wrong page. Yes, here it is. A friend of mine, it's the partner of a friend of mine who died, and this is really a sort of prayer for a life fully lived and a death fully lived. And I don't think there's much more we can ask than that. When Mora had died, these days filled with wonder of death. This morning I woke early, watch the day come, blue and hard-won. The rain's clean shine on the glass, the drops on the crossbar hanging in the light. I knew dailiness, saw birds moving across the window, saw the window for a portal, as in Renaissance painting. I never knew that death was this simple. You left as a woman holding a letter moves to the light. Then I wanted the grace to share the open secret, to be wasp in the apple and apple arching around the devouring wasp, sheltering its feeding. Oh, let me live living, devoured and devouring, eating myself down to my own core.
Thank you very much. Wonderful reading, and there are books. So
Let me stay here.
I don't. You may want to move or stay there as well.
Thank you very much. You're a wonderful audience. The attentiveness was coming off you.
Take your subscription forms on the way off now.
He always gets the plug in.
Sometimes they don't